Tonight we're in South London, and welcome to Question Time. And welcome to you at home, welcome to our audience for the first programme of the new year. They're going to be asking the questions. Our panel here, of course, don't know what's going to be put to them. They are the Liberal Democrat Home Office Minister, Norman Baker, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, Chuka Umunna, the Conservative backbench MP, Nadine Dorries, the Deputy Leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall, and the Mirror journalist and blogger known as Fleet Street Fox, Susie Boniface. And our first question is from Daniel Rees, please. Mr. Rees.
Should the young and poor pay to maintain the living standards of rich pensioners?
Should the young and poor pay to maintain the living standards of rich pensioners? This in the light of the Chancellor, George Osborne's announcement that he wanted to see £12 billion of cuts from the welfare budget in the next 2 years after the election. Nadine Dorries, what do you make of that? Is it fair?
I kind of knew you were going to come to me first on that one. OK, well, this is not a policy which is set in stone. It wasn't a policy announcement. It was simply announcing a direction of travel that we're going to be going on over the next, after the next general election.
Sorry, what is a direction of travel when in a speech he says he wants £12 million of further welfare cuts in the next 2 years?
After the next election.
Yes.
And he's indicating that the bad times are not over. We're still in a position where we're going to have to make more cuts, and they're going to be, and you know, the good days are not here yet.
But does he mean it when he says £12 billion of further welfare cuts? Does he mean that or not? It couldn't have been misspeaking, surely.
No, he does mean it, but I have to make a confession here. I have voted already in this Parliament for something that I didn't agree with on principle, and it's not something I will do again. And so I certainly won't be going into a voting lobby to vote to remove housing benefits from the under 25-year-olds. I will not be doing that.
All right. So you're... Oh, OK.
However, having said that, savings do have to be made. And I think that what we need to do is look at expand, and we do have to all be in this together, and the cuts do have to come from a wider perspective. I don't think it's right that we have pensioners who are, some very wealthy, who are still in receipt of various benefits. And I think what we need to do, I think, you know, people who live in, I'm actually a supporter to a degree of the mansion tax. I think we need to look at other ways of making the savings and other areas they can come from. I'm not sure we can continue to ring-fence some of the big budgets, which actually means that there are very few areas where the Chancellor can go to make savings, and so it tends to target the young, and it appears to be targeting the younger people and welfare. Welfare is the right way to go. We were spending too much on welfare, but I'm not a supporter of some of the announcements that have been made. But I do think that we need to look at other areas we can go to, and the savings still have to be there.
Well, we invited you here, I thought, as a vague supporter of the government, but clearly you're not.
I am a supporter of the government.
George Osborne has already lost one vote.
Well, I do vote on principle, and I will not vote to remove benefits from under 25.
So, Norman Baker, you've won a friend, because the Liberals said that these proposals put forward by George Osborne were extreme, unrealistic, unfair, a monumental mistake.
I think they're designed to get some blue water between the Conservatives and us and the Labour Party as the next election approaches. And I agree that we have to eliminate the structural deficit. It's absolutely right that we do that, and there's more work to do, and that is cut by probably a half by the time we get to the general election, and more has to be done. But it doesn't mean we have to balance the deficit on the back of the poorest people in society. That's not the right way to do it. You mentioned Nadine mentioned the mansion tax. That seems to me to be an entirely sensible proposition. Houses don't move. They can't be avoided in terms of paying tax. And we ought to be recognising that simply, for example, increasing council tax bands by adding 2 or 3 more at the top would be a good way to raise money and not affect people who are poorest. We need to also be looking at tax loopholes, and we've done a great deal, Danny Alexander's done a great deal as Chief Secretary to clamp down on tax evasion and all these overseas territories where people have been stashing their money. Let's have some more income from that. We could look at capital gains tax, and we could look at why winter fuel allowances pay to pensioners in Spain.
Okay. Paul Nuttall, where does UKIP stand on this?
Well, I think what Osborne is doing is he's playing politics on this issue. I mean, at first they were talking about getting the 12 billion, or making a start on the 12 billion from wealthy pensioners. They were looking at the winter fuel allowance, the TV licence, the bus pass. But then they backtracked, because generally pensioners and wealthy pensioners vote, and generally, I suspect, will vote Conservative. So what they've done instead is they're attacking the most vulnerable in society, who generally don't vote Conservative. What they're doing is they're looking at housing benefit for under 25s. They're also looking at people who live in council houses who earn over £60,000. But from my sums, that only adds up to £1 billion worth of savings out of 12 billion. So there's still a huge black hole.
Are you in favour of cuts in welfare?
Well, look, the welfare budget under Labour spiralled out of control to the point whereby it was costing each household £3,000 extra. And it could not go on. Something had to be done. But let me just give you an answer on the 12 billion. There is another budget there which is ring-fenced, which comes to around 12 billion. It's called the foreign aid budget. The foreign aid budget. Now, I'm not against giving money to countries who are in dire need, people who need to be fed. But what I am opposed to is giving money to countries like Argentina, who sabre-rattle over the Falklands, Brazil, which has just overtaken us.
So you can
save
your 12 billion that way, you think?
Well, look...
sorry, let's get it clear. Wait a minute. Are you in favour of cuts in the welfare budget or not? Yes or no?
I believe there do have to be cuts, but I believe that the cuts are being made in the wrong area, and I believe the way you should pay for these cuts is by going for the foreign aid budget and taking money off countries that don't need it, because, quite frankly, that's your tax, that's your money, and that foreign aid budget should be spent on our own people in this country.
You sir, in the front row here.
I think this attack on pensioners is rather unbalanced. Most pensioners are not rich. Those that are pay a lot of tax. And what is forgotten is 5 years of very low interest rates. That's decimated many older people's incomes.
And what do you make of the proposal to cut on younger people's welfare and leave the pensioners protected?
I think that is something that should be very carefully reconsidered.
Chukwumuna.
Well, I just don't think this divide and rule of our society, setting up the old against the young, is going to get us anywhere. Think about it. I mean, the pensioners that we're talking about, we say that they don't care whether their grandchildren get jobs or if they are in work, that they can earn more. This cost of living crisis, which is affecting everybody in the country, is something that needs to be dealt with. We've got people earning on average about £1,600 less than they were when the government came to office. And honestly, Norman, for you to be sitting on this panel and talking about the need for fairness when you voted through the bedroom tax is beyond me. But look, the way ultimately we will be able to deal with the public finances, and of course, look, we're in a tough situation in terms of the debt and the deficit, is by getting more people into work. Tragically, we've got almost 1 million young people out of work, and for those in work, we need to ensure that their money goes further. At the moment, at the end of the day, they are working harder than they've ever worked before, for less, and we need to deal with that. And
are you in favour of any cuts in welfare?
Well, look,
are you in favour of any welfare cuts?
We accept, if you let me finish, we accepted at the beginning of this Parliament the switch of the uprating of benefits from RPI to CPI, because we recognised that there were issues needing to be addressed in terms of our public finances. But you've got to do that in a fair way, and ultimately we've got to get... I mean, look, people are not earning enough, so we need to ensure, for example, that we enforce the national minimum wage. There are about 300,000 people who should be on that, who aren't getting that. We need to ensure that actually people are in receipt of a living wage, a wage that you can actually live off. That way... And that's why, that's why we wish to incentivise employers to pay a living wage.
So
and that way you get more income tax revenue, you get more corporation tax revenue, and then you can actually deal with your deficit. The reason that we had this debt and deficit issue coming out of the crash that was caused by the bankers was because tax receipts plummeted. The idea that if you just abolish the Department for International Development's budget, it will sort everything.
Is because you guys maxed out the credit cards of the country. That's
why. With the greatest
of
respect, Paul, your solution to the situation we are in with public finances at the moment is just to abolish the Department for International Development and everything will be okay. Right. No, we need to get more people into work and earning more.
Charity begins at home.
This lady's comment here.
Let me go to that gentleman there.
Yeah, I think at the heart of the question is more about whether we feel those with less should shoulder the burden in times of hardship. And actually, I don't think we are all in it together. If you look over the last few years, there are people on benefits who are really, really struggling. So I think rather than maybe cutting welfare that much, we should be looking at promoting growth. And I don't mean just growth in terms of what George Osborne has been saying about we're doing great, we're coming out of the recession, because people still aren't feeling it at the bottom. It means job creation, it means opportunities, not just London-focused jobs, it means jobs everywhere.
But for lots of people...
All right, hang on. I'll bring you in. Susan Bonneton.
Daniel's original question was, should young people pay the cost while pension and age benefits are protected? And the answer is quite plainly no. But it seems to me that the other four people around this table are all operating in a state of denial. There is something we cannot argue about, which is we have more older people than we have younger people. And people, when you get to a certain age, will get pension age benefits, whether it's pensions, whether it's winter fuel allowance, whether it's bus passes, TV licence, everything else. There are not enough younger people to pay for that in the future. It is coming down the track. You cannot avoid it. It's coming. And our main parties need to find a way to address that problem. And the problem is, as Paul said, and as the gentleman here mentioned, older people vote more in greater numbers than younger people do. And they have... they feel that they've paid into a system for all their lives and they think they should get something out of it towards the end. But the issue is that you didn't pay into a savings account all that time and the money's allotted for you to come and get when you're 65. It's been spent already. It's gone.
So what's your proposal?
Well, it's it's not me, thankfully, it has to make the decision. It's these guys here. But they have to come up with a decision about how they're going to address pension age benefits, because you cannot keep paying it to wealthy pensioners.
Let her finish.
I think there's no harm whatsoever in starting that debate and having a sensible debate about it and bringing in a voluntary opt-out system for some pensioners, so that if you don't want your winter fuel allowance, and if there is a sensible government campaign that says give up your 300 quid this year and it will go towards helping a single mum in your street, that kind of thing, you'll find that some people are opting out, and then it will perhaps become more palatable for some people, like this gentleman here, to agree that some benefits they can give up because they don't need them. It would be a start.
Okay. Nadine.
It's absolutely right that the way we assist in this is to get more people into work and more people earning. And in fact, since 2010, since the general election, 1.6 million private sector jobs have been created and been filled. Today, there are more people in work, and I queried this figure today because I found it hard to believe. There are more people in work today than there have ever been in work in this country ever. Now, that's quite a statistic and quite an achievement. 8 million of those people are women. We have 8 million women in full-time work today for the first time ever.
What's the nature of that work and how much are they earning? We've got this proliferation of people on 0 hours contracts.
Well, it's work they didn't have before, Chucker. It's work that wasn't there before. And Ed Miliband said... I'll let you finish, so please let me finish. When this government came to power in 2010, Ed Miliband said 1 million jobs would disappear. 1.6 million have been created. Ed Balls said it was a fantasy that each private sector job would replace a public sector job that had disappeared. Actually, private sector jobs have replaced public sector jobs by 4 to 1. So, you really, Chucker, the propositions of your party actually don't work.
Are we really saying, though, I mean, I've said it's a good thing. I believe it, of course it's a good thing that more people are in work. Of course, that's a good thing. But the question is, how ambitious are we for the country? Will any old job do, or do we actually want to see more people...
Any job will do. If you've been on welfare and you've been out of work, any job will do because you want to go out and work.
I've accepted that, but what I would say is we actually want to get people earning more. If you've got a job that doesn't actually pay enough that you can live off... That's
all right, you made that point. I want to go back to the audience. The woman in pink there.
We don't need cuts to pensions. We don't need
You're
cuts
not
to
getting
benefits.
them,
I
they'll
have
be
a very,
protected.
very simple solution. £70 billion a year is lost to the Treasury in tax evasion, and a further £25 billion in tax avoidance. If that money, if there was a serious attempt made, and I don't mean just this government, but the previous government as well, if a serious attempt was made to claw that money back from the tax havens and all the other tricks that these people use, if that was done, we would have enough money to staff our hospitals better, to staff our education service better, to bring back the libraries that we've lost, to replace all the fire stations that are being closed down. It's very, very easy.
A serious attempt has been made and is being made and is bringing us a significant income from that particular stream. We've invested well over £1 billion on dealing with tax avoidance, and for every pound we've spent, we've got £9 back. So that is actually working. It's a top priority for my colleagues.
HMRC has cut the number of tax inspectors.
No, well, that's the figures. We're putting in, I don't know about tax inspectors, but in terms of tax avoidance and tax evasion, particularly in overseas deposits, we're actually getting £9 in for every £1.
How much have you got
we
in
invest.
so far? Because she's saying you get 100 billion if you play your cards right.
Well, I'm not quite sure 100 billion, but we've got billions back so far. About, I think, from memory, about 10 billion.
93 billion, I think.
But can I make the point earlier on about income tax as well? Because Chucker was talking about helping, as I was, about helping the poorest in society. The reality is, under Labour, of course, we saw the abolition of the 10p tax rate, doubling income tax for the poorest people. What we've done is raise the tax threshold to £10,000. Everybody is
given people earning over £150,000 a huge tax cut.
£705 are better off as a consequence of that every year. 2.7 million people taken out of tax altogether. That's what this coalition government has done for the poorest people. So, and Nadine's right. Employment is actually at its highest level ever, and unemployment, Chuck, is lower than it was when we took over from you in 2010.
Okay. You should remember that Ed Balls has started to be very, very nice to the Liberal Democrats. So you don't have to take it out on Norman any longer.
OK.
I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to another question. As always, you can join in this debate, of course, from home, by text or by Twitter. Our hashtag is BBCQT, as you probably know. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981. The red button will tell you what other viewers are saying. Let's have a question, please, from Michelle Noesier.
When is it ever right to shoot someone who hasn't been unarmed?
Who is unarmed?
Sorry, who has been unarmed.
When is it ever right
to shoot someone
who's unarmed? Not when is it legal, but when is it right? Mark Duggan, of course, is in Michelle's mind. Chuka Umunna.
But, Michelle, I'll come to your question, but I think the first thing I'd just like to say about this is your heart just goes out to the family here. Before we even answer your question, you know, we've got a family that's lost a brother, a son, above all a parent, and his children are quite young. I lost a parent when I was pretty young, and it's tough. And this has happened under the glare of the media. But on your question, which of course goes to the verdict, the inquest verdict, to many people, many won't really understand how it can be that a man can be shot who's unarmed, and that is a lawful killing. And ultimately, unless we were amongst the 10 jurors, ordinary people like all of us here, who heard the evidence, visited the scene, I don't know, and I'm not prepared to second-guess that jury. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to be very clear what the police officer, what they were being asked to determine, which is whether the police officer concerned who fired the shot had an honest and reasonably held belief that Mark Duggan posed an imminent threat, and obviously the inquest verdict was that he did. But I tell you what I do know. I might not know what I would have done in that position, but what I do know is that there are still a lot of questions to be answered. The jury found that the police should have collected or could have collected more evidence before stopping the car. Why? Why was the car removed from the scene in the hours after? Why was no investigating officer appointed within the first 48 hours after what had happened? And of course, we also know that if you look at confidence in the police per se, I mean, I would say in my borough, we're here in London and my constituency, Streatham, is in Lambeth, I actually think police community relations the black community in particular, a lot better than what they were in the 1980s. No doubt about that. But we still have some outstanding issues. For example, the disproportionate stop and search of young black people on London streets. We have a situation where there are too many deaths in custody of black people, and people wonder why. And in that context, when something like what happened in the Mark Duggan case occurs, the trust isn't there because you've got things undermining that trust, and we need to deal with that. I'll just finish by saying this, though. I think the police do an incredibly difficult job. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't. I'm not sure I would be able to do that job. But for them to be able to do it effectively, they have got to be able to command the trust of the public who they're policing. And that is the big problem right now.
Okay. Norman Baker, you're a Home Office Minister. Do you agree with Chuka that there are many questions that remain unanswered about the way the police handle this whole?
Yes, I mean, I think the analysis there was pretty accurate. The reality is that we have had a jury verdict. We have to respect juries. It's an essential part of our legal system. They did sit for 3 months and I think interviewed or heard 93 witnesses as part of that process. So they reached a conclusion after due consideration, but there were indeed elements of the police activity that were brought into question. Of course, it's not finished here because the Independent Police Complaints Commission is undertaking further investigations into this matter. We're looking as a government to strengthen the IPCC anyway, and we're also bringing in a code of conduct ethics for all police officers. The stop and search powers that Chuka referred to, we already started a review of those last year. And we're taking that very seriously. It's important we have policing by consent in this country. And whenever we have a serious incident like this, it's important it's properly looked into from all aspects to try to minimise any problems in the past, in the future.
You, sir.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner today suggested that armed response units should wear video surveillance.
Yes.
Does the panel think that this would actually increase trust in the police?
What do you think?
Yes.
What do you think?
I think it's done elsewhere in the world, and to good effect. It produces a real-time evidence stream. It also, I think, would have been very reassuring to the family of Mark Duggan.
Paul Nuttall.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that that video cameras on the equipment of firearm officers, I think, would make a lot of sense. I think it would provide us with greater transparency and more accountability. It would give us, as people, probably a greater understanding and a greater sympathy, I suppose, in many ways, about the difficult job that these people do, because decisions have to be made in split decisions. We're not talking about minutes here. We're talking literally seconds. You know, it works for the armed forces. We had the prosecution which came off the back of the murder in Afghanistan, where that type of equipment was used. So I think it makes perfect sense to incorporate into firearm services here in this country.
Michelle's question wasn't whether it was legal, but whether it was right ever to shoot someone who's unarmed.
Well, I think...
Slightly different question.
Well, I think the officer involved obviously thought that his or others' lives were in danger, and the jury have supported that version. And look, you know, the jury have looked at this for 3 months. They've interviewed 93 people. You know, this has been they've had a real in-depth look at this. And, you know, let's not forget, these are 10 people who were chosen randomly, performing a civic duty. And I'm sorry, I don't think it helps when politicians come out. I think it's irresponsible, actually, when they try to question the decision that the jury have come to. I must say that the family coming out this morning as well and calling for calm, you know, you've got to give them respect for that, absolutely. Okay. And I like the noises... I like the noises which have come out of the Metropolitan Police today, and the fact that the Commissioner has gone to Tottenham to meet community leaders. Let's just hope for calm, and let's hope things work out and people can move forward.
Okay. You, sir.
Yeah, I think we've got to be considering the question of trust here. We've talked about that, but we're talking about what happened in the moment. But what happened afterwards was that the police briefed the media. They didn't brief the family. They didn't go and see the family. They went and spoke to the media, and they briefed against Mark Duggan without going to see his family. Now that's the real issue of trust here, and I think that's something we've all got to consider.
Well, that was actually, the Independent Police Complaints Authority misbriefed what had actually happened as
The
well.
woman in the second row from the back. There. Yes.
Sadly, this case is just one in a long line, whether it was Ian Tomlinson, Stephen Lawrence, even Andrew Mitchell, where the police have not only had serious failings, but also nothing seems to have changed. And how do we really make the police more accountable in these cases?
Susan Boniface.
It's more than just... I mean, the original question was, is it ever right to shoot an unarmed man? And of course the answer is no. No one could possibly say that it is right. I think part of the problem is this use of the word lawful in the jury's verdict. And in everyday use of that word means that it will be OK with us. The definition in terms of that inquest is slightly different, and it's got a different definition. It doesn't necessarily mean what we would take it to mean in everyday speech. So that's part of the reason there's been some confusion and upset at the end of what comes out as a lawful verdict. But it's also the fact that any of us in that situation, with the information that police officer had at that time, with your finger on the trigger, how many of us may also have pulled the trigger? The issue was that the intelligence he was given at that time, and the jury found unanimously, 10 to 0, that he did not have the right information when he was put in that position. Now, we ask people to do very horrible jobs for us in the police force on a regular basis and to go and shoot people sometimes, and I'm sure, I don't know who he is and I don't want to make assumptions, but I presume he spends a lot of time worrying about that decision that he made and thinking over and over and over and over. And if he had the right decision and had the right information, he would have perhaps done differently. And added to which, it wasn't just misbriefing that the IPCC gave to journalists after the event. They told journalists that Duggan had been engaged in a shootout and he was shot in reaction. Yeah. And when they knew that was wrong, they did not tell the journalists. They allowed that story to continue. That's more than wrong and unethical. It's just appalling. And the police didn't even go and see Duggan's mum for about 4 weeks after her son had been killed. She was getting information from the TV news. That's what causes distrust and riots and problems. Everyone can understand that.
OK. All right, thank you. The man up there, you, sir.
Why is there this unquestioning belief in juries? Not many other countries use the same system as us. We have to look into this as well.
Would you have rather a judge made that decision?
I think we need to look at it. I've spoken to people who have been in juries, and they say decisions are made on purely illogical information.
OK. And the man there in the check shirt, you, sir.
Yeah, perhaps, because from what it seems, is there any strong evidence linking Mark Duggan to actually having possession of the firearm? And from what it seems, if I was in a situation where I shot somebody in self-defense, but there was no evidence to show that they were going to shoot me, I somehow think the outcome may be different for me compared to a police officer. I think that should be questioned.
All right. Nadine Dorries.
I think there are a number of aspects to this case, and there's the human aspect, which is Mark and Mark's family. My own brother died at the same age as Mark, and, you know, my heart crunched every time you hear of a young man. I know the pain. I can understand, you know, that pain of loss of a sibling, and it's, you know, they must have been through this horrific process of waiting for the trial and all the misinformation and being briefed against. Must have just compounded insult upon injury and made their grief so much more intense. And then there's the other side of the case about what actually happened. My understanding is the police had intelligence that Mark was collecting a gun. They followed the car. The gun was in the car. Mark left the car with the gun in his hand. He lifted the gun. We know now to throw it. If you're the policeman who's facing him, when Mark lifts his hand with that gun, how do you know he's going to throw it? How do you know he isn't going to aim at you? And I would just ask the question, what was Mark doing with a gun in his hand? Where was he going with that gun? What was he going to do with it? And I think if you carry a gun in London, you take a risk. And I think it was an appalling situation. I am really glad to hear that the police are now going to wear cameras so that every single second of what happens, because, you know, 53 people were killed by guns in London over the last 3 years, I think it is, and 3 police shots have been fired. So, you know, just putting that in context, The police are keeping us safe. 53 people were killed with guns. It seems to be a growing problem, and I think it's one that we need to look carefully at, because the police are dealing with a very difficult situation, which is a rise in gun crime. And I think cameras on their uniforms is a very good way about making this problem doesn't happen again.
I'll take one more point from you, sir. If you both want to speak, so you, sir, first, and then I'll go to the lady behind you, and then we must move on.
I think a lot of the problems with the inherent distrust between the members of the community and the police probably has to do with a still very short underrepresentation of the black and ethnic minority community amongst the police, especially amongst the senior ranks, who have to make operational, strategic and, you know,
absolutely right.
All decisions that they have to make.
Okay. And the lady behind you, just briefly, if you would.
I think what's concerning is that we now know he didn't have a gun, and he was shot unarmed and killed, and then you compare it to what happened in Greenwich, where the two guys were brandishing weapons, and the police maimed them. So people are now wondering, he didn't have a gun, why not? Why was he killed? He could have been maimed.
All right.
Maiming is usually by accident. With police marksmen, they tend to fire at the body mass because it's the only way to guarantee you're definitely getting a shot.
And he did have the gun through it.
All right.
Before he was hit with the bullet. So
but there's also a narrative growing that it's all right to have shot Mark Duggan because he was a bit of a wrong-un, and that's not okay. The fact that he may have had a gun in the car, the fact he may have thrown a gun, does not make it all right to shoot him after he has dropped the gun. You know, it's obviously wrong. It has to be wrong.
Okay. I'm going to move on to another question.
All the reports were saying that he was shooting. People don't trust the information when it comes to police shooting someone dead.
Let's go on to another question. Nikolai Ratsu, please. Nikolai Ratsu.
Now that the tidal wave of Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants has failed to materialize, will the racist rhetoric now subside, and will Romanians and Bulgarians once more feel welcome in this country?
The wave of Romanian... You're Romanian yourself, aren't you, sir?
Yes,
you are, yes, right. Well, will the racist rhetoric subside, Paul Nuttall?
How did I know you were coming to me first? Well, look, we've said all along we don't know how many Romanians and Bulgarians will come. We just don't know.
Two.
Look. When was New Year? Look. Migration Watch UK, for example, said that 50,000 will come per year for the next 5 years. That's 250,000. The Institute for Democracy is saying it will be 385,000 over the next 5 years, which is a city not dissimilar to Bristol. What we're saying in UK is quite simply, it makes no sense economically to have a whole open border to the whole of Europe, because we have to whilst we're members of the European Union, because freedom of movement of peoples is enshrined in the treaties. It makes no sense whatsoever to have an open door when you have 2.4 million people unemployed and 1 million young people in this country who can't get a job. It makes no sense whatsoever to saturate the employment market any further. And on top of that, you know, freedom of movement of people might work when you've got economies of a similar size, and also where the wages are similar. So ourselves, France, the Scandinavian countries. Where it doesn't work is, take for example Bulgaria, where the average wage is €350 a month, the minimum wage is €150 a month. Look, the traffic will only be one way. And quite frankly, we don't think we can cope. And what we'd like to see is a points-based system in this country, where if you've got the skills that this country needs, yes, please come here and work, but it makes no economic sense to have an open door whilst we have 1 million of our own young people unemployed.
You want to come back on that?
Yes, there have been any number of surveys done which have proved that actually immigration is of a positive economic benefit to this nation.
Well, actually, there's been a number of studies which prove actually it doesn't. And I know Nigel Farage made the point the other day, and I concur. You know, if it means that we're a little less poorer, I would like to see us control our own borders, because if we carry on the way we're going, the population of this country will be 88 million by 2060, and quite frankly, I think we're pretty full already.
Susie Boniface.
You're full of something.
Jolly funny.
The question about whether the racist rhetoric will end is plainly no, because it's going to carry on.
What was racist about that?
I'm going to tell you if you'll let me finish. I'm descended from migrants twice over, Danish and Irish, both of whom have been treated reasonably good and bad in this country, and both of whom were hard-working. One worked in the army, another worked as a housemaid for, 20 hours a day for very little money. Both of whom came and had their families here and produced and were part of Britain. If you want to send me back where I go, figure out cut me in the middle. I didn't say that. But if you're talking about, we've got a migration issue in this country. We've always had open doors. People can come and go. That's what's made Britain great over the years. That's what we are. And in fact, most migrants in this country at the moment, 40,000 or so, I think, last year, came from China. Now, what was the Prime Minister's response to the terrible problem of Chinese migration? He's decided to relax the visa rules for the Chinese. It's all right if they come. He doesn't want the Romanians here. He doesn't want the Bulgarians here. He doesn't want people who look a bit dusky or a little bit dark, people who don't bring enough money in. But he's happy for people that he can make a buck out of or go on a trade mission to with his father-in-law. The way we talk about migration... I find the way we have discussed the migration issue utterly appalling, completely disgusting, obnoxious, offensive and very un-British, and I'd like it to just try and change and grow up and be sensible.
Nadine Dorries. No, hold on a second, Paul. Nadine Dorries, I'll come back to you later on.
Well, of course, in order to go for the populist cheer, Susie, of course, didn't mention the fact that David Cameron has no authority whatsoever over our own borders and the European Union and how many people come here. We actually can't set immigration targets on who comes to us from within the European Union. We have no idea how many people are going to come, but we do know how many millions of people have the right to come if they want to. Now, a large part of Britain this week has seen, well, over the last few weeks and over Christmas, has seen flooding. One of the problems with flooding is we're building on our floodplains. And so we have less and less area of the country where water can drain away from. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's not particularly an issue, we can deal with that. Well, you might think that as long as you're not living in the areas that are being flooded. Now, the only way we can control immigration into this country is to leave the European Union. The only way that's going to happen is if we have a referendum. And the only way you're going to get that is making sure you get a Conservative government, because it has committed to a referendum in 2017 to give British people the choice whether we're in or we're out. So if you don't want to have an open-ended target of people who can come to this country, you will have an opportunity to go and vote and say no, because David Cameron has no legal powers to stop anybody from in the European Union coming here and settling here if they want to. That's what our entry of the European Union means.
And are you against the tidal wave of Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants that was expected, according to the questionnaire, and hasn't arrived?
There has been no tidal wave, but there might be tomorrow. There might be next year. We don't know. That is the problem. We could have a tidal wave from Yugoslav. We could have a tidal wave. We don't know. This is the problem. And I really object to these objectives and these targets. We're going to have a cap on immigration. We can't put caps on immigration because we have open borders. Legally, we are unable to do that. There is only one solution, and that's to vote Conservative, have your say in a referendum in 2017, and go to the polls and decide yourself whether you want to be in the European Union or out of it. And then you can come here and you can argue the case about whether or not we have open borders.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I take real issue with that. I think if you're Spanish, for example, where unemployment amongst under 25s is at 70%, you might come to London to look for a job. If you don't find a job quickly, you're probably going to go back to Spain. It costs, I pay £600 a month just in rent and bills to live in London. I think the 1 million people unemployed in the UK, which is continually rolled out, those are people in the north of England, in areas where industry has collapsed, in areas where there's no jobs for those people, It's long-term unemployment, and it's an
With the
endemic.
greatest of respect, we have probably around 750,000 illegal immigrants in the country, and we don't even know where they are. We have inward net immigration of about 200,000. You know, this scenario that you're painting of people coming here and deciding they can't get a job and going just doesn't exist. People do come and they do stay. And this is one of the most important points as well. The people that they present the biggest threat to, those people who come here from Spain and Romania and other countries, who haven't got skills, who come here and take the jobs of what we would call blue-collar workers. So it's people in constituencies like Harlow and others who actually feel the threat of not having protection on our borders because they feel their jobs are in competition.
How do they just take the jobs?
Because if you're coming
it's
here
someone's
from...
choice to employ somebody.
No, if you're coming here from Romania...
They don't just pitch up and just, suddenly, I'm going to have your job. They apply for jobs in the same way that everybody else applies for a job. They apply for jobs in the same way that everybody else applies for a job. And in a market economy, if I choose to employ X who comes from Spain over...
Because of black market economy, people taking less money and less than the minimum wage to work.
Well, black market economy is a totally separate issue.
All right, all right, okay.
But it's a real issue and it exists.
All right, Norman Baker.
Do something about
Hold on, the one thing that...
Norman Baker, Paul, I'll come back to you. Norman Baker, what do you say to him and to her and to him?
Well, let me say...
And to you, who doesn't want a referendum.
Look, I mean, I remember canvassing in the Eastleigh by-election last year, and if you conclude from the UKIP campaign, what you conclude from the UKIP campaign in Eastleigh was that not only were all the population entirety of Romania and Bulgaria coming to this country, they're all going to Eastleigh constituency. Perhaps that's why I've not seen any, perhaps they're all Eastleigh at the moment. The reality is that we've got to be very careful about language on this, and overhyping what is a sensitive issue does not help a sensible discussion about what is an issue that does concern many people. But there is a lack of, I think, logic applied to this. Vince Cable was telling me that one of his constituents he was canvassing said, I'm fed up with all these people coming to the country, I'm going to go and live in Spain. Without any sense of irony, that it was exercising the same rights to go and live in Spain that other people were exercising to come here. And we've got Brits all over the European Union working everywhere, working, studying, exercising their treaty rights.
And
if we start limiting other people's rights, then they'll start limiting our rights as well. Of course we want people to come here to work and exercise their treaty rights. We don't want people coming here to just get treatment on the health service. But the way this has been approached, I think, in some elements of the media, has not been helpful. It's been destructive. And we should all be rather more careful with the language we use.
OK. You said in the front.
Is anybody on the panel aware that 7,000 Romanian and Bulgarian students have been cut from financing on the 18th of November by David Willett? They've been summarily cut from financing. Nobody has been warned of this. The funds have been withdrawn from their own accounts, and they have been given a short notice by the colleges to abandon the programs.
Are you one of these?
No, I'm one of the representatives for their plea.
Right. As a government member present, Norm, do you want to answer this?
I am addressing
and then I come to you,
the...
What do you say to this?
Well, I understand the point. I understand the point you're making.
Is that it?
It's a summary cessation of financing for Romanians and Bulgarians alone in practice.
Why is that happening?
I can't give you a direct answer to that.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, Chukwumuna.
Well, look, Nikolai, to you, asked the question. I'm a son of an immigrant, and I think immigration's been a good thing for our country. Go back to the 1940s, 50s, when people arrived on the Empire Windrush and helped rebuild this country after the war. I mean, what would our NHS do without the immigrants in this country? Never mind, we've got a few Nobel Peace Prizes and a few Nobel Prizes from our immigrants. But the thing is, I think, Nikolai, all that people want is a system that's properly controlled and managed. More work needs to be done on that. They want immigration to work for us economically, and also people come over to integrate. I don't think that's unreasonable. But what I have found with this, I don't actually, I've heard some of the comments already, I don't think this is an issue of racism, actually. With a lot of people. In my own constituency, during the 2010 general election, ironically, the people who tended to raise the immigration issue with me more than others were my African and Asian constituents, actually. And what it was really about was that immigration is a proxy for people's concerns about the economy. Now, where I have a big issue with what Nadine and Paul are saying is this, is that the problem with our economy, it is too low wage and too low skill. And if you look at all the Western economies, we rank 5th in terms of how the percentage of our labour force is made up of those jobs. Now, if you shut down the borders and we leave the European Union, it is not going to solve that problem. So going to the blue-collar workers you were talking about, Nadine, what we need to do is transform our economy so we grow our manufacturing base and deliver more jobs that pay more money, and then that will solve the problem. Not just putting out...
You can do it in 13 years.
You guys allowed in 13 years more people to come to this country than in 1,000 years previous. You'll have 4 million net to come.
And you've been apologising for it ever since.
And you've been apologising for it ever since. And you totally miscalculated. And all you've done in working class towns and cities up and down the country is people have come on site, onto building sites, people have been undercut, and British workers have been driven off, and now you find them either unemployed or driving taxis in many cases.
We've heard Jack Straw and David Blunkett apologising, saying this was a mistake. Well, you can include Peter Mandelson if you like.
Yes.
And you don't apologise for it? You think Labour's made no mistake?
No, I certainly wouldn't say that. I think in terms of the transitional controls in respect of the countries that joined the European Union in 2004, we made a mistake in not applying the maximum transition controls. But what I would say to Paul is, look, the way you help people is ensuring you properly enforce the minimum wage, you get living wages, you grow our economy. I see absolutely no suggestions whatsoever coming from your party that will help the community that you're talking about.
You don't do it by saturating the job market even further. And that's what's happening.
But what you need to do is actually transform the job market. You've got nothing to offer in that direction at all.
What do you have to... Hold on a second. Hold on. What do you have as Labour to say to the 77% of people in this country? You'll have seen the statistic, according to the British Social Attitudes, who want to see immigration cut. What is Labour's answer to that?
Well, I think on low-skill immigration, we believe that there was too much of it from the European Union. And I think there is one important thing about the European Union. The founders of the European Union had in mind free movement of workers, not free movement of job seekers. And undoubtedly, we do have to work with our European partners to deal with that. And actually, I mean, I met with a number of them this week. They're very open to that if we constructively engage with them, instead of saying, hey, do what we want, otherwise we're going to walk off.
What is free movement of workers, not of job seekers? You can't go and look for a job.
Well, look...
You can
No. The point is, if you come over...
This is a radical reform of the EU treaty coming along.
No, it's not. Look, the difference is, what people intended when they built the European Union in the first instance is that people who either had a job or had the skills to get a job would move around the European Union. The problem that we've had at the moment is that you had, during our time in office, and this is where we did make a mistake, you had high-skilled people coming from other countries to do low-skilled jobs here. That's where we've said that we should have, that there was too much.
Also, the difference was, Chuck, when it was set up by countries with pretty similar economies. Once you let the whole of Eastern Europe in, you ended up with countries with divergent economies and with countries that were far poorer. So it's only one way.
I can't deconstruct the argument, but I did promise this lady on the left, who's been trying to get in for the last 10 minutes, that she'd have a quick word, and then we'll go on to a final question.
Thank you. Nadine, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your surname. And the Liberal gentleman, I don't know your name, I've forgotten it.
But it doesn't matter about the name.
Right.
Conservative, Liberal Democrat.
Being serious at the moment, what I object to strongly is this coalition government, which both of you belong to, using the smoke screen of immigration to hide what you are doing, privatising the NHS, killing the welfare service. And this, you're a woman. You should care, because women are going to be left holding the baby when you bring us back to pre-1948, because we can't, now you can't get legal aid anymore. Who suffers? Women. They're in a terrible marriage. They can't get out of it. The husband's got the money, or the partner. Somehow you are trying so well to make immigration the big issue, while you quietly, as I say, privatise the health service, as you know, the welfare service you kill. You're bringing in the gagging law. And also, Lewisham, as you know, we went to court with Mr Hunt We've won both times.
All right.
So
you're losing a bigger audience here because people don't know about exactly what happened in Lewisham.
No.
But hang on. But you've touched on a point which brings us to our last question,
yes,
which I'll come to.
118 clause.
The last question, which comes from Janet Egan. Hang on. Yeah, you can answer. Janet Egan.
Given overcrowding in A&E and maternity departments, how will the ongoing programme of closures help?
And Nadine, you can answer that, and the lady on your left at the same time.
Well, at this stage, touched on the 118, Section 118. So let's talk about that and bring that in. First of all, if I can just touch on Lewisham. Section 118...
You'll have to explain what Section 118 is.
OK.
I'd rather you did.
There was an issue in Lewisham where Lewisham A&E was under threat. In fact, it was last time I was here on Question Time.
Yeah, it was.
The reason why it was under threat was because under, I'm sorry, Chuck, but under your government previously, a PFI contract was set up, which meant the hospital had to pay £1 million a week in debt interest payments. And so there was a threat to the hospital. Section 118 has been brought in to enable an administration organisation, which again was brought under the last government, to look at the most effective way, using experts made up of both doctors and clinical staff and accountants, to speedily deal with the issues surrounding those hospitals. Because the reason why the word speedily is used is because people who use hospitals are patients and are ill, and people's lives are important. And so when a hospital is failing, as we've seen with a number of hospitals, that something has to happen quickly. Now, for anybody who thinks, and I've seen some of the propaganda, that Section 118 will be used when it goes through on Lewisham, it will not. Lewisham is absolutely protected, and I've had confirmation of that from the Department of Health this afternoon.
All right.
It will not apply to Lewisham.
OK,
so if anybody's worried about that,
all right, now come to the question. All right, now you've had your go. OK. Given the overcrowding in A&E and maternity departments, how's the ongoing programme of closures going to help?
It's going... Well...
Norman Baker.
I must just say,
I still got Christmas, Norman, and A&E targets, and how well they were met.
I must just say, first of all, in response to the last question, my party, Lib Dems, has not used immigration as a smokescreen for anything, and I want that on the record in this programme. Secondly, in terms of the health service, this government has guaranteed above-inflation funding for the health service through this Parliament, despite the difficult economic circumstances we find ourselves in, because of the importance of the NHS, and that's something I very strongly support. There's also been reforms. Some people haven't liked the reforms, but the reforms have led to GP local commissioning, they've led to better integration between health and social services, and they've led to more treatment locally without everybody having to go to A&E for the most minor incident, and that's got to be good as a direction of travel. So I think we've actually got quite a good story to tell.
Didn't the coalition agreement say we'll stop centrally dictated closure of A&E and maternity wards?
Well, I don't think we are.
That wasn't that in the agreement?
I don't think we are directing closures of hospitals.
But they're happening.
Well, they may be happening because there may be local GP commissioning, which is providing alternative means of dealing with non-acute services, which is a better solution.
Okay. Paul Nuttall.
Well, from what I've read, and I've briefly read up on the Lewisham situation, is that the protest group took Mr Hunt to court, and they won, and Mr Hunt appealed in October and lost, and congratulations, well done to all you guys. And also from what I've read, I mean, Lewisham wasn't failing anyway. But, however, if I can just move on quickly...
You're against the NHS anyway, aren't you?
No, I'm not against the NHS. I would like to see the NHS streamlined. The NHS is too big at the moment.
You say I quote you, the very existence of the NHS stifles competition. Well, that's what you told them.
Well, look, I genuinely believe that competition drives quality. Equally, the NHS, the cost of the NHS trebled under Labour. We're getting older, the population's going up, we're going to have a debate pretty soon in this country how we fund healthcare, because I'm telling you now, within the next 20 years, it's going to be unsustainable if we continue on the road that we're on.
But when you say its very existence stifles competition, and it's, I quote you again, as long as it's the sacred cow of British politics,
we need to suffer with...
So what do you want for the health service? We pay for it.
Well, we need to have a debate in this country how we're going to fund healthcare in the next century. I'll give you another statistic. It's stuffed with managers. For every nurse, there's 2 managers. You know, only 48% of people who work for the NHS in England aren't clinically trained. I want to see money go into nurses and doctors. I want to see red tape cut, and I basically want to see the NHS streamlined so we all get a better service.
OK, Paul, thank you. The man there with spectacles on, and then I come to you.
The clause 118 is extremely important. It's clause 118 of the bill going through the Lords at the moment. And what this does is the government's attempt to recover from the Lewisham defeats. Lewisham, as Nadine actually wrongly said, is a thriving, successful, solvent hospital.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Didn't have any
solvent.
financial problems. And yet this administrator from a neighbouring trust with financial issues decided to draw Lewisham into that. And what clause 118...
the A&E here
exactly.
and give it to the other
That
place,
was rejected by the courts.
Right.
But what the government's now trying to do is change the rules so any future administrator will be able to willy-nilly close other services.
Let's leave section 188 and deal with the main question.
I've got to say, in terms of what's happening to A&E, in fact, the health reforms more generally, Norman, I don't know how you can sit there with a straight face and say what you've just said, that you're proud of your government's record. Well, let's look at A&E. Let's look at A&E. In the last 12 months, over 1 million people have had to wait more than 4 hours to be treated in A&E. The problems we've got in an A&E are partly also triggered by the government's cuts to social care, which have meant it's been more difficult to discharge elderly patients, which has meant that there's been a backing up in the beds. There are 5,000 less nurses. The government has shut down a quarter of NHS walk-in centres. And you say you're proud of that?
The statistics,
are you on?
The statistics for the NHS. We can quote statistics selectively if you want to do so, but the statistics for the NHS demonstrate actually quite a good record on A&E in this government.
Susie Boniface. Susie Boniface.
Well, I should start off as an apology, because I'm a resident of Greenwich, just down the road, and my hospital is the one that has had this ridiculous PFI scheme started by Labour, which was in debt, and therefore meant yours gets closed. And the question was, would closures help the problem in the NHS? The answer is no, because the fundamental problem you've got is that for 65 years, ever since 1948, politicians have wanted to tinker with something very, very good. And they've all wanted to change it and fix it and streamline it and cut it and slice it and think they can improve it somehow. And the fundamental thing about the NHS, which Nye Bevan said in 1948, words to the effect of, it is despite our financial and economic anxieties, and in 1948 they are far worse than they are now, despite our anxieties, the most civilised thing in the world to do is to put the welfare of the sick above everything else. And that's what the NHS does.
We've pretty much got to stop. I'll take a point. The gentleman there had his hand up there. You say yes.
This has been a problem that has been ongoing for many years that nobody has addressed. In 2002, I went to the A&E. I spent more than 10 hours waiting in the A&E. I don't want to tell you the hospital where I went to. And I think someone said earlier something there. What is actually disturbing the NHS is all politicians want to kick the NHS like a football. You kick it to me, I kick it to you, and we find a goalpost, which is inaccurate. And also, someone mentioned about the managers. There are too many managers in the NHS. And I've got colleagues who work for the NHS who tell me, who are practitioners, and they tell me, they push you about. They don't even know what should be happening on the ward.
All right.
That should be addressed.
There are a lot of hands up, and the panel would all like to come back and comment on that, but unfortunately we only have 1 hour for question time, so we've got to stop. I'm sorry about that, but our time's up. Next week, we'll be in Durham. The Archbishop of York, John Sentimer, will be among the panellists there. The week after that, we're going to be in Dundee. So if you'd like to come to either Durham or Dundee, apply. Our website address, as ever, is on the bottom of the screen there, or you can call us 0330 123 9988. If, by chance, you're listening to this on Radio 5 Live, the debate, as you know, goes on Question Time, Extra Time. My thanks to our panellists here, to all of you who came here to Lewisham to take part in this programme. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.